The first light of dawn crept softly through the window, casting long shadows on the floor and gently illuminating the room. It was a quiet morning, almost peaceful, yet beneath the tranquility, a sense of unease lingered. Lily awoke to the sound of Jason's shallow breathing, punctuated by a persistent, harsh cough. She knew that sound too well. Her son's asthma was flaring up again. The weight of anxiety pressed down on her chest as she sat up quickly, pushing away the exhaustion that threatened to overtake her. She had barely slept the night before, her eyes heavy with fatigue from hours of monitoring Jason. He had been struggling, and every cough sent waves of fear crashing over her. Still, she had stayed by his side, unwilling to leave him alone, afraid that something might happen if she did. Jason was her world, and the thought of him in pain was more than she could bear. As she rushed to his side, the cold tile floor beneath her bare feet made her wince, but she barely noticed. Her eyes, though tired and blurry from lack of rest, never left Jason's small form in the bed. He was sitting up now, his little hands clutching his chest, his eyes wide with discomfort. Lily's heart tightened as she saw the fear in his eyes. She knelt beside him, gently resting a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him, though she felt a panic of her own rising. "Mommy's here, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "Just breathe slowly, all right? I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." She could feel her heart racing as she grabbed the inhaler from the bedside table, her hands shaky as she administered the medicine. Jason's breath came in short, erratic gasps, and every cough seemed to take more out of him. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, both of them caught in a silent battle against something they couldn't control. Jason's small frame trembled, his face pale from the effort of breathing. Lily could feel her own anxiety mounting. Each cough echoed in her mind, each shallow breath a reminder of how fragile their lives were. She held his hand tightly, her thumb rubbing small circles over his knuckles as she whispered soothing words, though her voice felt small against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "I know, baby, I know. Just breathe, she whispered, trying to reassure him, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort him or herself. Time seemed to slow as she waited for the medicine to work. The stillness in the room was suffocating. Lily's mind raced. What if this was the time it got worse? What if this was the one episode she couldn't manage? The fear was suffocating, but she couldn't let it show. Not now. Jason needed her to be strong. It was a long, agonizing few minutes before she saw the signs of relief. His breathing began to slow, becoming more regular, the panic in his eyes fading just a little. Slowly, Jason laid back against the pillow, his exhausted body sinking into the bed. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to wake you." Lily fought back the tears that threatened to spill. She leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and kissed him softly. "You don't ever have to apologize, Jason. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm just glad you're okay." Jason gave a small, tired smile, but his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. Lily remained by his side for a few more moments, her fingers tracing patterns on his blanket as she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The worst was over for now, but the fear of what could happen next still gnawed at her insides. This wasn't the first time Jason's asthma had brought them to the edge of panic, and Lily knew it wouldn't be the last. But each time, she had to remind herself to breathe, too. The clock on the wall ticked on, but in that still moment, time felt as if it had stopped. Lily stayed with him, just holding his hand, until his breathing evened out again. Then, with a quiet sigh, she began to pull away, but Jason's voice stopped her. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small, barely a whisper. It was a question that haunted her every day. Would they be okay? Could they survive the constant financial struggles, the mounting bills, the uncertainty of Jason's health? Lily's heart ached as she struggled to find the right words. "We're always going to be okay, Jason," she said, her voice steady, though she knew he could hear the slight quiver beneath her words. "We may have tough days, but we'll always be all right because we have each other." Jason's eyes closed, his small body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had weighed on him all night. Lily sat in the dim light of the room, watching over him. As she listened to his gentle, steady breathing, she let herself rest for a moment, though the worries never left her. There was so much to face: unpaid bills, endless doctor's visits, sleepless nights, but in that quiet moment, she felt something more important than fear: love. She loved him fiercely, and no matter what obstacles life threw their way, she would always find the strength to keep fighting for him. Because Jason was her heart, and as long as they were together, there was nothing she couldn't face. As she gently pulled the blanket over him, making sure he was warm and comfortable, Lily glanced around the small room. The walls seemed to close in sometimes, the weight of their struggles heavy on her shoulders. But in this moment, with Jason peacefully resting, she could see the light through the cracks. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give her hope that, despite the hardest moments, she would always be there for him, and they would always find a way forward. Lily sat silently beside Jason's bed, watching him drift into a peaceful sleep. His breathing was steady, the soft rise and fall of his chest a small comfort in the midst of the storm that raged in her mind. The room was bathed in the soft light of the evening, but Lily's gaze was distant, her eyes unfocused as her thoughts spiraled out of control. The hum of the clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the room, but in her mind, the clock felt like a constant reminder, reminding her of time slipping away, of all the things she couldn't fix, and all the worries she couldn't silence. Jason's health had always been fragile. She had learned to live with the constant stress, the endless doctor's visits, and the looming uncertainty that came with it. But over time, she realized that the weight of it all was becoming harder to carry. She had always been able to push through, always forced herself to smile, to be the strong one for Jason, but lately, the burden seemed heavier than ever. Her heart ached with the fear that no matter how much she tried, no matter how many hours she worked, how many sacrifices she made, she would never be able to give Jason the life he deserved. She stood up quietly, walking to the window and staring out into the growing darkness. The sky outside had turned to a soft violet, the last light of day slowly fading away. The peaceful scene outside contrasted sharply with the whirlwind inside her. She let out a long breath, feeling the weight of her worries pressing down on her chest. There were bills she couldn't pay, phone calls she was too afraid to answer, promises she had made to herself that she couldn't keep. It felt like everything was slipping through her fingers, like she was constantly falling behind no matter how hard she tried to catch up. She turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen, her movements slow and heavy. The house felt eerily quiet, too quiet for her liking. The silence was suffocating, and the more she tried to fill it, the more it seemed to grow. She opened the cupboard, pulling out the dish soap, but she wasn't really seeing what she was doing. Her mind was elsewhere, on the mounting bills, the insurance companies, the calls she had missed, the mounting pressure of everything that was out of her control. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she washed the dishes, her thoughts flickering back to Jason. She could see his smiling face in her mind, his eyes full of trust and love, completely unaware of the storm swirling in her heart. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Life had just unfolded this way, and she was doing the best she could, but it felt like it was never enough. Each time she made a step forward, something knocked her back. There was always more to do, always another bill to pay, another doctor's visit to schedule. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the overwhelming feeling that it wasn't enough, that she wasn't enough. The sound of the water running in the sink was the only thing that filled the silence as she continued to wash the dishes. She felt like she was running on autopilot, going through the motions without really thinking. Her mind was too full of worries, too full of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. What if Jason's condition got worse? What if she couldn't keep up with the medical costs? What if she lost her job, or worse, what if she couldn't care for him the way he needed? Her heart tightened with each thought, the anxiety growing stronger with every passing moment. After a while, she turned off the water and stood still in the kitchen, her hands still damp from the dishes. Her eyes wandered to the stack of bills on the counter, a constant reminder of the financial strain she was under. She felt a wave of panic wash over her. The bills were piling up faster than she could keep track of, and no matter how much she worked, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to get ahead. She had taken on extra shifts at the hospital, worked overtime, but it still wasn't enough. The pressure of it all was suffocating, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the overwhelming urge to break down. But she couldn't. She couldn't let Jason see her fall apart. He needed her to be strong. He needed her to keep it together, to be the rock he could lean on when the world felt too heavy. So, she forced herself to take a deep breath, to push the fear and panic down deep inside her. She couldn't afford to let it show. Not now. Not when Jason needed her. She glanced back at him, his peaceful face a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. He was so innocent, so full of hope and love. How could she let him down? How could she fail him when he depended on her so completely? Lily walked back to Jason's side, sitting gently on the edge of his bed. She reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering there for a moment. She had to believe that everything would be okay. She had to. For him. But the truth was, she didn't know if it would be okay. There were too many things she couldn't control, too many unknowns. All she could do was hold on, keep going, and hope that somehow, everything would fall into place. But that hope felt fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. As she sat there, her mind drifted back to the countless nights she had spent awake, lying in bed next to Jason, staring at the ceiling, wondering how they would make it through another day. The worry never seemed to stop, never seemed to ease. It was always there, lingering in the background, waiting to swallow her whole. And yet, despite all the fear, despite all the uncertainty, there was something deep inside her that kept her going. A flicker of strength, a quiet voice that told her to keep moving forward, one step at a time. She had no answers, no easy solutions, but she couldn't give up. Jason needed her. And no matter how heavy the weight of the world felt, she would carry it. For him. Tomorrow would come, and with it, a new set of challenges. But Lily would face it. She would face it for Jason, for their future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. She couldn't control the world around her, but she could control how she responded. And as long as she had the strength to keep going, she would. Jason's health, the bills, the fear, it was all a part of their journey now. But they would face it together, because, in the end, love was the one thing they could count on. And as long as they had that, they could endure anything. Lily stood at the door, her hand gripping the cold, metal handle, her fingers trembling slightly. It had been a long, overwhelming day, filled with constant demands and expectations. As she gazed out at the world beyond, the weight of her thoughts seemed to press down on her chest. It wasn't the kind of weight that could be lifted easily. The constant buzz of obligations, the ever-present worry of what needed to be done next, and the endless spiral of what-ifs had left her feeling suffocated. She longed for a moment of escape, anything to silence the chaos in her mind. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Lily stepped outside. The night air was cool against her skin, sending a shiver up her spine. For the first time today, she felt like she could breathe again. The world outside felt different, more alive in its stillness. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hum of the city, and the occasional chirp of crickets. The noise of the world around her seemed muffled here, like she had stepped into a different reality, one where time moved more slowly, more gently. She took a few more steps forward, each one slow, almost as if she were afraid to break the fragile peace that had descended on her. She moved through the garden with careful, deliberate steps, her shoes crunching softly on the gravel path. Her mind, usually racing with thoughts, seemed to still in the cool night air. She stopped in front of a bed of flowers that bloomed late in the season. The roses, though muted in color, were a testament to resilience, standing tall in the fading light, holding onto their beauty despite the cold. Lily knelt down, her fingers brushing over the delicate petals of a rose. It was fragile but strong, much like how she had felt these past few months, exhausted, yet still standing. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the simplicity of the touch, the way the petals felt soft yet firm against her skin. The quiet in the garden allowed her to slow down and think, to let the weight of her responsibilities momentarily drift away. She didn't have to be in control right now. She didn't have to fix anything or solve anything. She could simply exist. Her thoughts wandered to the past few months, the endless days of juggling work, family, and her own internal struggles. The guilt of not being enough, the constant pressure to do more, to be more, to somehow make everything better. But tonight, it all seemed so distant. In the presence of the night, Lily realized that she had been fighting so hard to manage everything that she had forgotten how to just live in the moment. She had allowed herself to become consumed by what was coming next instead of appreciating what was right in front of her. Lily stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her knees, her heart heavy with the realization. How many times had she ignored the present, always looking ahead, planning for the future, worrying about what might go wrong? It was as if she had been so focused on controlling every aspect of her life that she had lost sight of the fact that there was beauty in simply being. She looked up at the sky, dark and vast, the stars scattered like diamonds across a velvet canvas. The night seemed endless, full of possibilities, and for the first time in weeks, she felt small. But in that smallness, there was comfort. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Her chest, once tight with anxiety, loosened with each exhale. In that moment, she realized she was holding onto something that no longer served her, the need to control every outcome. She didn't need to predict the future, to worry about what would happen next. The future would come in its own time. What mattered was right here, right now. The sound of Jason's voice from inside the house reached her ears, faint but familiar. His laughter echoed softly through the walls, and it brought a warmth to her chest. Jason had always been her anchor, her constant reminder that, despite everything, there was still joy to be found. Even in the midst of the chaos, there were moments of peace, of connection. She smiled softly, realizing that while she had been lost in her own struggles, he had quietly been there, supporting her without needing anything in return. She turned back toward the house, her steps lighter now, the gravel crunching softly beneath her feet. It was as if the night itself had given her a new perspective. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She could let go, even if just for a moment. And that moment, that quiet peace, was enough. Lily entered the house, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the cool night outside. She paused for a moment in the doorway, her gaze lingering on the familiar surroundings. Jason's laughter still echoed from the living room, a reminder that life continued, that despite the uncertainty of what the future held, there was beauty in the present. She didn't have to be everything for everyone, and she didn't have to have all the answers. She could simply be here, in this moment, and that was enough. With a soft sigh, Lily made her way to the living room, her heart a little lighter, her mind a little clearer. The future was still uncertain, but in this moment, she had found peace. And that was enough to carry her through whatever came next. Lily stepped quietly into the living room, the door creaking softly behind her as she entered the space. The long day had left her feeling drained, her mind still whirling with the many concerns that had consumed her. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, looking for something that would provide her with the comfort she desperately needed. It was then that she saw Jason, her steady anchor. He was sitting on the couch, deeply engrossed in the pages of a book, his brow furrowed in concentration, yet there was an undeniable calmness to his presence. The room, which had felt so full of tension, seemed to quiet around him. Without making a sound, Lily made her way to the couch, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Every step felt heavy, as though the world was pushing down on her, urging her to keep moving forward even when she wanted to pause. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside him. There was a part of her that wanted to speak, to share the overwhelming thoughts that had been clouding her mind all day, but she couldn't find the right words. Instead, she simply sat, feeling the space between them, the weight of her unspoken feelings heavy in the air. Jason, sensing her presence beside him, glanced up from his book, his eyes soft with concern. He lowered the book gently and placed it on the coffee table, his full attention now on her. His gaze, always steady and understanding, seemed to invite her to open up without any pressure. It was the calm she needed, a contrast to the storm raging in her mind. Lily's eyes met his, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, though she could hardly find the words to express it. She had spent so much time carrying the burden of her worries alone, always focused on what was next, what was coming, as if life was a never-ending race. She hadn't realized how deeply exhausted she had become, physically and emotionally, until this moment. The noise in her mind, the constant thinking and analyzing, seemed to recede slightly as she sat beside him. "Jason," she began softly, her voice catching a little, as if she hadn't spoken in days. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. It's like I'm running from one thing to the next, always trying to stay ahead, always trying to keep up. I never stop, never take a breath." She paused, her chest tightening as she spoke. The vulnerability in her words was unfamiliar, but there was something about Jason's presence that made it easier to be honest. Jason remained silent, his expression unwavering, but his hand reached out, gently resting on hers. The warmth of his touch, so simple and yet so profound, grounded her in the moment. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply as though the simple act of breathing was a reminder to slow down. When she opened them again, she saw the understanding in Jason's eyes. He knew exactly what she meant. "You don't have to keep running, Lily," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm, as though he were gently guiding her back to reality. "You've been carrying so much, trying to control everything. But right now, here, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to know what comes next. You just need to be here, with me. With yourself." Lily swallowed hard, the emotions she had been bottling up beginning to stir. Jason's words hit deeper than she expected. She had been so consumed by the future, by the idea of what could go wrong, that she had forgotten the importance of the present. She had spent so much time planning and worrying that she had overlooked the simple, yet powerful, beauty of just being. She shifted slightly, leaning into Jason's side, feeling the reassuring steadiness of his presence. It wasn't that everything would magically be okay, she knew that. But in this moment, there was peace. The noise in her mind wasn't gone, but it was quieter, less urgent. She could hear Jason's steady breathing beside her, and it was like a rhythm she could follow, a reminder that there was no rush. "I feel like I've been so focused on the future, like if I can just get to the next thing, the next milestone, everything will be okay. But now, it just feels like I'm constantly chasing something," Lily admitted, her voice cracking slightly as she spoke. Her shoulders, which had been so tense for so long, began to relax as she leaned against Jason. She felt a wave of exhaustion, but it was different from before. It wasn't the draining kind of exhaustion that came from running endlessly. It was the release of holding so much inside for so long. Jason's thumb traced gentle circles on her hand as he listened. His quiet presence seemed to say everything that needed to be said. There was no judgment, no expectation. He simply let her feel what she was feeling, allowing her to let go in her own time. "You don't have to chase anything, Lily," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm. "You've been doing so much already. It's okay to take a step back, to just be. Be here with me, in this moment. Everything else can wait." Lily closed her eyes, her breath slowing as she let the weight of his words settle over her. In the quiet of the room, with Jason beside her, everything felt different. She didn't have to hold herself to impossible standards, didn't have to keep pushing herself to be something or someone else. For once, it was enough to simply exist, to let herself be present. She could feel the tension in her body slowly unwinding, the tightness in her chest easing with each passing second. For the first time in so long, Lily allowed herself to simply be, to experience the peace of the present without the worry of what was to come. It wasn't about solving every problem or figuring everything out. It was about accepting that she didn't have to have all the answers right now. Jason, sensing the shift in her, gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm here. We're here, right now. And that's all we need." Lily nodded, her eyes still closed, feeling the comforting weight of his words. As they sat in silence, the world outside seemed to fade away. There were still responsibilities waiting for her, still problems to face, but in this moment, it didn't matter. She was allowed to be still. She was allowed to rest. When she finally opened her eyes, she felt lighter, not because the weight of her problems had disappeared, but because she had given herself permission to pause, to breathe. She didn't need to be perfect or have everything under control. All she needed was to be present, to trust that the future would come when it was meant to, and for now, she could simply be here, in this moment, with Jason by her side. The peace she had been searching for had been within her all along. All she needed to do was stop running. And for the first time in a long while, she finally allowed herself to rest in the present. Lily's eyes fluttered open, the soft light of dawn creeping through the curtains. For a moment, everything felt still. But then, as reality set in, her mind began to race, and her heart followed suit, beating faster with every passing second. Today was the day. The day she had been working towards for months. The presentation. The one that could change everything for her career. She had prepared exhaustively, research, data, practice runs, but today, that preparation suddenly felt insufficient. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. Despite all the time she had invested in the project, doubts crept in like shadows, quiet but persistent. Asterisk, what if I mess up? What if I forget everything? Asterisk, she pulled the blanket tighter around her, but the warmth did nothing to soothe the gnawing anxiety at the back of her mind. What if, after all her hard work, she wasn't enough? Lily stared at the ceiling, the silence of the early morning wrapping around her like a cocoon. She wished she could shut off her thoughts, focus on the peaceful moment before her, but the pressure was suffocating. She had reached this point through sheer determination and sacrifice, and yet, she wondered if it would be enough. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth of the room, and she rubbed them together as if to generate some comfort. The soft sound of movement from downstairs broke the silence. Jason, her partner, was awake. She could hear the faint clinking of mugs and the bubbling of the coffee machine. His steady presence had always been a grounding force in her life, especially in moments like these, when her anxiety threatened to take over. After a few moments, Lily pulled herself from the bed and stood, the floor cool beneath her bare feet. She stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to collect herself. The reflection in the mirror across the room caught her attention. She was no stranger to the look of a woman under pressure, tired eyes, slightly furrowed brow, the weight of expectation hanging over her. But there was something else too. In that reflection, she saw a woman who had worked tirelessly, who had dedicated herself to something she cared about deeply. She wasn't just the nervous person standing in front of the mirror, she was also the person who had earned this opportunity, step by step. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her hair, brushing it behind her ear. She reached for the outfit she had chosen the night before, an elegant, fitted blouse and a skirt that made her feel confident, ready to take on the world. The fabric was soft under her fingers, but it offered no real comfort. She wasn't sure if it was the clothes or the sense of control they gave her, but she knew she needed to feel like she was in charge, even if only for this one day. As she descended the stairs, she was greeted by the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee. Jason was standing at the counter, his back turned, humming softly to himself as he prepared breakfast. There was something about the rhythm of his actions, the small, familiar sounds of his morning routine, that always brought her a sense of calm. It was as if he was reminding her that life would continue, no matter what happened today. Jason turned as she walked in, a soft smile spreading across his face when he saw her. His eyes instantly softened with concern, noticing the tightness in her posture. "Up early," he remarked, his voice warm, though there was an edge of worry beneath it. "Can't sleep?" Lily forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said quietly, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "Just nerves. Big day ahead." He set a steaming cup of coffee in front of her and reached out, his hand brushing hers as he did. The warmth of his touch anchored her, offering a brief respite from the storm in her mind. "You've got this, Lily. You've worked so hard, and I know you're going to nail it." Lily's heart fluttered at his words, but the anxiety still lingered, like a weight on her chest. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, the warmth sinking into her skin, but it didn't quite reach her heart. "I just don't want to mess up," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I forget something important? What if they think I'm not good enough?" Jason's expression softened even further, and he pulled out the chair beside her, sitting down. He leaned forward, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Lily," he said, his voice firm but gentle, "you've done everything you can to prepare. You're more than ready for this. It's just about showing them who you are, and what you've accomplished. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to be yourself." She met his gaze, the comfort of his words slowly sinking in. For a moment, she felt the tightness in her chest loosen. She had been so focused on her fear of failure that she hadn't stopped to acknowledge the journey that had led her here. She had worked relentlessly, put in the hours, sacrificed weekends, and pushed through doubts, and that was something to be proud of, regardless of the outcome. She took a deep breath and, for the first time this morning, allowed herself to relax slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers resting on the edge of the coffee mug. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jason smiled, squeezing her hand gently. You've always had this strength in you, Lily. I'm just here to remind you of it. With a renewed sense of determination, Lily stood up from the table. She finished her coffee and wiped her hands on her skirt, the nerves still there, but now tempered with a quiet sense of resolve. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than before. I'm ready. Jason stood with her, giving her a quick hug before she left the kitchen. I'll be here when you get back. Go show them what you've got. The world outside seemed to pause as Lily stepped out the door, the familiar hustle of the city continuing around her. She walked toward the office building, but the path felt different today. Each step felt heavier, the pressure of the day weighing on her shoulders, but also propelling her forward. As she approached the building, the sight of the glass doors seemed almost too large to face. But she squared her shoulders, taking one last deep breath, and walked inside. The elevator ride up was a blur, her palms were clammy, her heartbeat steady but loud in her ears. The doors opened to the conference room, and Lily stepped out. Her hands clenched slightly, her breath shallow for just a moment. But as she took in the familiar faces of her colleagues, her feet felt more firmly planted on the ground. She had arrived. She had earned her place at this table. No matter the outcome, this was her moment, not just for the career she dreamed of, but for the woman she had become. She wasn't just fighting for success. She was fighting for herself, for her confidence, for her belief that she was enough. And as she began her presentation, Lily found that the nerves, the doubt, and the pressure slowly began to fade. With every word, she felt more confident, more sure of herself. Today wasn't just about proving herself to others, it was about proving to herself that she had everything she needed to succeed. She had faced her fears, stood tall in the face of doubt, and was ready to show the world who she really was. This, Lily realized, was an important day, not because of the career change it might bring, but because it was a day where she chose to believe in herself. And that, in itself, was enough. The room was heavy with tension as Jason sat across from Lily, each of them weighed down by the words that had just been spoken. There was a quiet between them, but it wasn't peaceful, it was thick with unspoken thoughts, a chasm widening between the two of them. Lily's hands trembled slightly in her lap as she tried to make sense of what Jason had just said. The accusations hung in the air like an unbearable weight. Jason's eyes remained focused on the table, his posture stiff, as if the words were too painful to speak directly to her. He clenched his jaw, his knuckles turning white where they gripped the edge of his seat. Lily could feel the coldness radiating off of him, a stark contrast to the warmth she had once known. A wave of frustration and hurt began to rise inside her. She had trusted him, had believed in their connection, but now, it felt like everything they'd built was crumbling in an instant. You don't understand, Jason, Lily said, her voice unsteady, but she couldn't stop it. The words tumbled out in a rush. You've twisted everything I said, everything I've done. I never meant for it to sound like that. I trusted you more than anyone, and now you're telling me I don't know what I'm talking about? Jason didn't look at her as she spoke. He kept his gaze fixed downward, his lips pressed into a thin line. He was fighting something inside him that was preventing him from looking her in the eye. And in that moment, Lily felt the smallest flicker of doubt. Was he afraid to face her, or was he avoiding the guilt that lingered between them? I didn't twist anything, Jason replied, his voice quieter now, but tinged with something darker, resentment. Maybe you don't want to hear the truth. Maybe you're too scared of what it really is. His words cut through the air like a blade, each one sharper than the last. Lily recoiled, her heart stammering in her chest. The truth? What truth was he talking about? She had always believed in the honesty they had shared. She had never hidden anything from him, at least, not intentionally. Yet now, standing before him, she wondered if she had missed something, some silent betrayal that had been growing between them without her realizing. Was there something he knew that she didn't? Her hands clenched into fists in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing, but the more she thought about it, the harder it became to stay calm. Everything inside her felt like it was shaking apart. How had they gotten here? How had a simple conversation, one that had started so innocently, become this, an all-out war over something that should have been simple, trust? Jason, listen to me. Lily nearly shouted, her voice cracking under the strain of holding back her emotions. I haven't been hiding anything from you. I never have. I've been open with you, I've been honest. But this is something else. This is not the person I thought I knew. You're telling me I've been lying, but you're the one who's twisting the truth into something it's not. She saw Jason's jaw tighten, the muscles in his neck standing out as he tried to control the anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. For a split second, she thought he might explode, that the tension would finally reach its breaking point. But instead, he simply stared at her, his eyes cold, almost as if he was looking through her. What do you want me to say, Lily? Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. That I was wrong? That I made a mistake? Maybe I did. But I'm not the only one here who's been lying. You've been hiding something too, haven't you? The accusation hit her like a slap to the face. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. What was he talking about? She had nothing to hide. Or at least, she didn't think she did. She had always been upfront with him, hadn't she? She couldn't understand what he meant. Her mind raced, trying to recall every word, every moment in their relationship, to figure out what she had missed. Hiding something, she repeated slowly, her voice trembling. What could I possibly be hiding, Jason? I've never lied to you. Jason's eyes flickered, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they met hers. There was something there, something dark, something unspoken. It was as if he was searching her face, trying to find some hidden truth. And in that moment, Lily felt exposed, as if every secret, every fear she had ever kept buried inside her was now laid bare before him. I know you, Lily, Jason said, his voice low and almost inaudible. I know when you're hiding something. I've seen the way you act sometimes, the way you pull away. You think I don't notice? But I see it. And I can't just ignore it anymore. Lily's breath hitched in her chest. She had always prided herself on being open with Jason, on never keeping anything from him. But now, as his words sank into her, a sickening doubt began to creep in. Had she really been hiding something? Had she unintentionally built walls between them without realizing it? No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, Jason. I'm not hiding anything. You're wrong. You have to be wrong. But even as she said it, part of her wondered if she was just fooling herself. Was she truly being honest, or was she trying to convince herself that she had done nothing wrong? The uncertainty swirled in her mind, pulling her deeper into the confusion that had already taken root. Jason didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at her, his face hardening again, his expression closing off. The silence stretched on between them, suffocating them both. Lily could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the painful realization dawning that whatever they had was slipping through their fingers. Every word they spoke, every glance they exchanged, seemed to drive them further apart. Finally, Jason spoke again, his voice strained. Maybe we've both been wrong, Lily. Maybe neither of us is entirely innocent here. Maybe the truth we thought we knew isn't the truth at all. His words sent a chill through Lily's entire body. Was he saying that they had both been lying? Had they both built a relationship on falsehoods, on half-truths and misunderstandings? Was this what their love had turned into? Lily's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't break down in front of him, not now, not when everything they had was on the line. She stood up abruptly, feeling as if she might explode from the pressure building inside her. I can't do this, Jason, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I can't keep fighting over something that doesn't make sense. If you really think I've been hiding something from you, then I don't know where we go from here. She turned to walk away, her heart heavy in her chest. Every step felt like it took her further from the man she had once loved, further from the life she had once believed in. As she reached the door, she hesitated for just a moment, hoping he might stop her, that he might reach out and say something, anything, to make her stay. But there was only silence. No words of comfort. No apologies. Nothing but the echo of her own footsteps as she left him behind. The door clicked shut behind her, and Jason was left alone in the stillness, surrounded by the weight of the truth that neither of them could bear to face. The truth had been distorted, bent out of shape, and now, there was no going back. Lily walked quickly down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty house, the sound harsh and hollow against the silence that surrounded her. Her heart pounded heavily in her chest, as though it were trapped under the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The conversation she had just left replayed over and over in her mind. Jason's words had felt like a slap to her face, a betrayal of everything they had built together. She could still hear his voice in her ears, accusing, doubtful, "Lily, I think you're hiding something. Have you been lying to me?" Those words were sharp, cutting through her like a knife. She had never thought Jason, the person who had always been her safe place, would look at her with such distrust. Her breath caught in her throat as the pain hit her full force. The warmth she had once felt in his presence now felt distant, replaced by a coldness she couldn't shake. Lily had tried, desperately, to explain. She had opened up, her voice trembling as she searched for the right words to assure him that there was nothing to hide, that her heart was as true as it had ever been. But Jason's eyes, filled with suspicion and doubt, made her feel as though she were speaking to a stranger, someone who couldn't hear her, couldn't see the truth. His gaze was a wall, an impenetrable barrier between them. The more she spoke, the more she felt the distance grow, a chasm she couldn't bridge no matter how hard she tried. She stopped at the living room window, staring out into the night, but the view offered no solace. The world outside was quiet, as if nothing had changed, but everything within her was in turmoil. Her chest felt tight, the weight of Jason's doubts pressing against her lungs, making it hard to breathe. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold on, but it felt like she was slipping away. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. She turned away from the window, pacing back and forth in the dimly lit room, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had things gotten this far? How had the person she loved, the person she had trusted with her heart, come to question her every move? She had always been open with him, always shared her thoughts and feelings. Why now? Why this sudden shift in his trust? Her thoughts swirled, a tangled mess of confusion and hurt. She began to question herself. Was there something she had missed? Had she done something, even unknowingly, to make him doubt her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, eating away at her confidence. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from him, but the fear of pushing him further away kept her silent. She wasn't sure if Jason even wanted to hear her anymore. Meanwhile, Jason sat on the couch, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with frustration. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had always trusted Lily, had always believed in their bond, but now there was a crack in that belief, a crack that was widening with every passing second. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. The small things, the little moments when Lily had seemed distant, evasive, it was all adding up in his mind, and he couldn't ignore it. The doubt had taken root, and it was growing, feeding on every whisper of uncertainty. Jason's thoughts spiraled. He could feel his anger building, but it was mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. How could she hide something from him? How could the person he had trusted above all others suddenly become someone he couldn't understand? He stood up abruptly, pacing the room, his mind racing as he replayed their conversation, trying to make sense of it. He wanted to be sure, wanted to trust her, but the doubts kept pushing him further away from that certainty. His frustration grew as he tried to make sense of it all. He loved her, that much was clear. But was love enough? Was it enough to overcome the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right? Every time he thought of their past, the moments when he had felt close to her, the moments that had once felt like they meant everything, now seemed tainted. He couldn't trust his own thoughts anymore. He couldn't trust his own feelings. Jason stopped by the window, his hand resting against the cool glass as he stared out into the night, but his mind was far from the peaceful view outside. The air felt thick, oppressive, like a storm was brewing inside him, but he couldn't find a way to let it out. The silence between him and Lily was suffocating. He could feel it weighing on him, but he didn't know how to break it. He didn't know how to fix what was broken. Lily stood at the other end of the house, her arms still wrapped tightly around herself, her thoughts racing. She wanted to go to him, to tell him everything, to make him see the truth, but the words wouldn't come. Every time she tried, she felt as if she were sinking deeper into the quicksand of misunderstanding. the harder she struggled to reach him, the further away he seemed. She didn't know if she could keep doing this, keep holding onto a love that was slipping through her fingers. She didn't know if she could bear the weight of Jason's distrust. But then, a small voice in her head whispered that maybe the truth was something they both needed to confront. Maybe the reason Jason was so distant, so suspicious, was because she had been keeping her own secrets. Not big ones, but small things, things she hadn't shared because she didn't want to hurt him, because she feared what the truth might do to their relationship. But now, the cost of hiding those truths seemed too high. If they couldn't be honest with each other, could they really stay together? Or was their love already too broken to fix? Lily closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. She knew she needed to find the courage to speak, to reveal everything, but the fear of what might happen, of losing Jason forever, made her hesitate. She felt torn, caught between the desire to be open and the fear of the unknown. As she stood there, alone in the darkness, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth, whatever it was, had already been distorted, twisted by suspicion and fear. And she wasn't sure if either of them could ever find their way back to the love they once had. Lily sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her fingers nervously crumpling the corners of the letter she had just written. The words that had once seemed so clear in her mind now felt like heavy chains, weighing down her chest with an unbearable sense of dread. She had thought that being completely honest with Jason would lead to a breakthrough in their relationship, that it would bring them closer together. But now, with the silence that hung thick in the air, Lily wasn't so sure anymore. It had all started innocently enough, just another conversation they'd had countless times before. But this time, Lily had felt a deep urge to come clean, to finally open up about the things she had been carrying inside her for so long. It was as if the weight of her secrets had grown too heavy to bear alone. The lies, the little half-truths, the moments of doubt and fear that she had tucked away in the darkest corners of her mind, they all came rushing out in one single, overwhelming flood. She told Jason about everything, her insecurities, the times she had questioned their future together, the doubts she had kept to herself out of fear of hurting him. She told him about the mistakes she had made and the worries she had about their relationship that she had never voiced before. Jason had sat across from her, listening intently at first, but as the conversation continued, his expression began to change. His brow furrowed, and his eyes, which had once been full of warmth and love, slowly hardened with something that Lily couldn't quite understand, disappointment, perhaps, or maybe even anger. She tried to continue speaking, to explain herself, but it felt as if every word she said was pushing him further away. "I didn't ask for this, Lily," Jason had said, his voice low and strained. "Why couldn't you just keep some of this to yourself? I didn't need to know everything." The words hit her like a slap, sending a sharp pang of guilt deep into her chest. She had thought she was doing the right thing, that the truth would set them free. But now, looking at him, she saw the pain in his eyes, the hurt that she had never intended to cause. In that moment, something inside Lily broke. She had hoped for understanding, for a sense of relief after unloading everything that had been weighing on her heart. But instead, she felt a cold emptiness settling in the pit of her stomach. The silence that followed her confession felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with the tension between them. Jason had stood up abruptly, his movements sharp and frustrated, and without another word, he left the room. His retreating footsteps echoed through the hallway, leaving Lily in a profound silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat there alone, feeling the sting of her own actions. What had she done? She had wanted to be honest, to build their relationship on a foundation of trust, but now she was unsure if she had destroyed everything they had worked so hard for. She ran a shaky hand through her hair, her thoughts swirling in a storm of regret and confusion. Was this really the right choice? She had tried so hard to be open, to share her deepest fears and doubts with Jason, but now she wondered if it had been too much. Had she shared too much of herself, too much for him to handle? Or had she revealed something about their relationship that was too difficult for him to accept? The tears that she had been holding back began to well up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, as if trying to erase the emotions that were threatening to spill over. She glanced at the door, hoping that Jason might come back, that he might say something to reassure her, but the room remained eerily quiet. She was left alone with her thoughts, and in that silence, the weight of her actions became even more apparent. She thought back to all the times they had been happy together, all the moments when everything had felt right. They had built a life together, a future full of shared dreams and promises. But now, it felt as though everything had come crashing down in an instant, as if her honesty had shattered the delicate balance they had created. She couldn't undo what she had said, couldn't take back the words that had already been spoken. But she couldn't help wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Lily stood up slowly, her legs shaky as she walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. The quiet of the night felt overwhelming, as if the world had stopped spinning and left her suspended in a void of uncertainty. She wanted to call out to Jason, to apologize, to beg him to come back and hear her out. But she knew deep down that it wasn't that simple. She had crossed a line, had opened up in a way that had left both of them exposed, vulnerable in ways they hadn't been before. And now, she didn't know how to repair the damage. She thought about Jason's face when he had walked out of the room. His eyes had been filled with something that she couldn't quite place, hurt, confusion, maybe even betrayal. Had he felt as though she had betrayed him by revealing the things she had kept hidden? Or was it that her honesty had made him see things differently, things he wasn't ready to confront? Lily's heart ached at the thought of losing him. She had never wanted to hurt him, but now she was faced with the painful reality that her actions had consequences she hadn't anticipated. She had wanted to be truthful, to be open and transparent, but now, it felt like that very truth was tearing them apart. Was this what honesty really brought? Pain and regret, in a distance that seemed impossible to bridge? As the night stretched on, Lily remained rooted by the window, lost in her own turmoil. She knew that she couldn't change the past, that the truth had already been spoken. But she also knew that the consequences of her decision would follow her for a long time to come. And as she gazed into the darkness, she realized that sometimes, the hardest part of being honest wasn't just telling the truth, it was living with the aftermath, with the realization that the truth can sometimes do more harm than good. With a sigh, Lily finally sank back onto the bed, her body heavy with exhaustion and regret. She closed her eyes, hoping for sleep, but even in the darkness, the weight of her decisions pressed on her chest, a constant reminder of the consequences of her honesty. The first light of dawn crept through the window, casting long, soft shadows across the room. Lily stood motionless, staring out at the sky as the darkness slowly gave way to a tender pink hue. It was the kind of morning that promised a fresh start, the kind of morning where everything felt like it could change. But as she looked out at the horizon, the feeling inside her was far from hopeful. It was something else, something more complicated, a mix of uncertainty, fear, and the faintest thread of determination. Jason's words from the night before echoed in her mind, and she felt a tightening in her chest every time they surfaced. "I need time." The simplicity of the phrase cut through her like a knife. She had spent so long building up the courage to be vulnerable, to lay bare the feelings she had kept hidden deep within her. She had poured out her heart to him, expecting to finally be seen, expecting it to bring them closer. Instead, it had only created distance between them. She had tried so hard to share everything, to tear down the walls they had built around themselves, but now, standing there in the morning light, the weight of her actions seemed heavier than ever. Her body felt drained from the emotional upheaval. Her mind swirled with doubts. Was it too much? Had she said the wrong things? Would he understand? Had she pushed him too far too fast? Lily wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the pieces of herself that felt scattered and broken. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that was both freeing and terrifying. She had spent so many years hiding behind walls of her own making, protecting herself from the fear of rejection, but now, in her pursuit of honesty, she had exposed her rawest self to someone she wasn't sure could handle it. The minutes passed in silence, and she felt every second drag on, the air in the room thick with the weight of her thoughts. Jason had left early this morning, retreating to the space he had said he needed. The quiet had been deafening after he left, leaving her alone with nothing but her own restless thoughts. She wasn't sure if she had made a mistake by sharing everything, but she knew she couldn't keep it inside any longer. The truth had been festering inside her for far too long, and she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that sharing it would somehow bring them closer. But the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Had she misunderstood the nature of their relationship? Was she asking too much of him? She looked down at her phone, the screen still displaying the message she had sent to him just moments before he left. "I understand you need space. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that she couldn't force him to be ready, couldn't make him understand her the way she needed him to. But it was also a statement of her own resolve, a declaration that she was willing to give him the space he needed, even if it was painful to do so. She wasn't asking for immediate answers. She wasn't demanding that he come back with an explanation or an affirmation of his feelings. All she wanted was the truth, the real, raw truth. But even as she tried to accept this, a new wave of doubt rushed over her. She had been so focused on Jason, on his feelings and his needs, that she hadn't taken the time to focus on her own. Had she been so desperate for connection that she had neglected her own well-being? She could feel a knot forming in her stomach, the uncomfortable sensation of having poured so much of herself out for someone else, only to be left wondering if it had been enough, if it had been the right thing to do. Taking a deep breath, Lily closed her eyes for a moment. The morning light bathed her face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to simply feel the warmth of it. She was not ready to let go of her connection with Jason, but she realized now that she had to let go of the need to control the outcome. She couldn't keep carrying the burden of worrying about what would happen next. She had done all she could, and now, she had to trust in herself. She had to trust that whatever happened, she would be okay. Stepping away from the window, she walked over to the small table where her coat lay. She ran her fingers along the fabric, feeling the soft texture against her skin, grounding herself in the present moment. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: she could not keep waiting for someone else to validate her worth. She had to start believing in herself, in her own strength, in her own ability to navigate the unknown. With a quiet resolve, Lily reached for her phone once more. She typed out a short message to Jason, her fingers moving with a sense of finality. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." The words felt right, simple and clear. She wasn't going to beg for his attention or try to convince him to understand her. She was offering him the space he needed, but in doing so, she was also offering herself a chance to breathe, to heal, and to rediscover who she was outside of this relationship. She paused for a moment, looking at the message on her screen. She wasn't waiting for an immediate response, and she wasn't going to sit around wondering what he might think. She was ready to move forward, to face whatever came next with grace and courage. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was the only way forward. Lily put the phone down and turned toward the door. The world outside seemed to call to her, the promise of a new day stretching out before her. She took a deep breath and stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against her skin. With each step, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter, as if she were shedding the doubts and fears that had held her back for so long. She wasn't running away from her emotions, but she was choosing to walk forward, to keep moving, to keep living. The horizon before her was vast and uncertain, but Lily was no longer afraid to face it. She wasn't walking into the unknown blindly, she was walking toward it with her eyes open, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future might be unclear, but she knew one thing for sure: she was going to be okay. She would navigate it with the strength she had found within herself, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Lily's footsteps echoed softly in the early morning quiet. The street was nearly empty, save for a few leaves tumbling in the wind. The coolness of the air settled against her skin, and the rhythm of her walking offered her a small comfort. She wasn't in a hurry, there was no rush today. The world around her seemed still, but inside, her thoughts were a whirlwind, swirling with all the uncertainties that had been consuming her for the past few days. The conversation with Jason had left her unsettled, lingering in her mind like an unanswered question. His words, though carefully chosen, had not given her the clarity she needed. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that by revealing her feelings, her deepest thoughts, she would finally break through the wall that had been silently building between them. But his response had been ambiguous, leaving her with a hollow feeling she couldn't shake off. She tried to tell herself that time would answer all their questions, but deep inside, a fear gnawed at her, a fear that maybe time would only drive them further apart. And that thought alone was enough to make her chest tighten, a dull ache that never seemed to go away. Lily had always been the type to push through pain. She was no stranger to hardship, and over the years, she had learned to bury her emotions, to keep them hidden beneath a facade of calm. But this time, things felt different. There was an emptiness she couldn't ignore, a sense of vulnerability she wasn't used to. It was as if everything she had built up around herself had suddenly started to crumble, and she was struggling to keep her balance. She quickened her pace, trying to outrun the thoughts that were chasing her. Her mind kept drifting back to that night when she had shared everything with Jason, the quiet words, the raw honesty. She had hoped it would bring them closer, that the invisible distance between them would dissolve. But instead, all she felt was a growing sense of uncertainty. He had listened, yes, but his silence afterward had been deafening. Was he processing his feelings? Or had she said something that made him pull away? Every time she replayed the conversation in her mind, she came up with more questions, but no answers. It felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a vast, empty expanse, unsure whether to jump or to retreat. As she walked, she found herself gazing at the ground, her thoughts heavy and clouded. The sound of her footsteps on the pavement was the only thing grounding her. The weight of it all was becoming too much to carry alone. She wished she could tell Jason everything she was feeling, but how could she, when even she didn't understand it all? She felt like she was floating in a sea of confusion, desperately trying to find something solid to hold on to. Her mind began to wander back to her own life, the uncertainty that had been creeping in from every direction. Her career, once a source of pride, now seemed like a path she had taken for all the wrong reasons. Her relationships, too, had begun to feel fragile. The people around her, though supportive, didn't seem to understand the internal struggle she was facing. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being the one who could always keep it together, but now, she wasn't so sure. It was as if the foundation she had spent years building was no longer reliable, and she didn't know how to fix it. Lily paused for a moment, standing still in the middle of the street, letting the world around her spin for just a moment. Her breath was shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to push everything out of her mind, her doubts, her fears, her questions. She wanted to feel something other than this gnawing sense of fear, this sense of being lost. She longed for clarity, for an answer, for something to give her direction. But as the wind brushed against her face, she realized that answers weren't always immediate. Sometimes, they came slowly, in pieces, as you walked through the uncertainty. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned her head and saw an older woman approaching, her gait slow but steady. The woman had a quiet grace about her, her expression calm, as though she had seen and lived through a lifetime of challenges. As she passed, their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that fleeting glance, Lily felt something she hadn't expected, a kind of silent understanding. The woman didn't speak a word, but there was something in her eyes that told Lily everything she needed to know. It was a reminder that hope wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, hope was simply about continuing to move forward, even when you didn't know where the path would lead. Lily stood there for a long moment, watching the woman's figure fade into the distance. Her chest felt a little lighter now, a little less burdened. She wasn't sure why that brief encounter had affected her so much, but something about it had. It was as if the woman had silently passed on a gift, something simple, yet profound. The realization that hope wasn't something you found in one single moment, but something you nurtured over time. It was the quiet persistence of stepping forward, even when the future was uncertain. With renewed determination, Lily began walking again, this time at a slower pace. Her steps were no longer hurried or filled with anxiety, they were deliberate, measured. She still didn't have the answers she had been searching for, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was a small feeling, but it was enough. She didn't have to know everything right now. She didn't have to figure it all out at once. She could keep searching, keep moving forward, one step at a time. After all, she had done it before. She had faced uncertainty before and had found her way through. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would still be filled with doubt and fear, but Lily knew one thing for certain: she was not alone in her journey. The search for hope wasn't something you did in isolation. It was something that connected you to others, to the world around you. And even when things felt dark, there were always glimmers of light, always signs that you weren't as lost as you thought. As she walked, Lily felt her chest lift, her breath steady. She wasn't sure where the path would lead, but for the first time, it didn't matter. She would find her way. Hope was still there, and though it wasn't a bright, shining beacon, it was a quiet presence, always waiting to be rediscovered, one step at a time. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park as Lily stood at the edge of the small pond. Her hands were tucked into the pockets of her jacket, and her gaze was distant, fixated on the shimmering water that seemed to ripple with the breeze. The world around her seemed still, but her mind was a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts. It had been a long time since she had taken a moment to simply breathe, to step back and reflect on her life. She had been feeling lost lately, caught in a loop of uncertainty. Everything seemed to blur together, her work, her relationships, her sense of self. She had been living in a haze, constantly moving but never truly going anywhere. Every day felt like a repeat of the last, filled with small, mundane tasks that provided little joy or satisfaction. Even her relationship with Jason, which once felt like a source of comfort, had started to feel more like an obligation than something meaningful. She wasn't sure when it had started to drift, but she knew something was off. The weight of it all had begun to wear on her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she was just floating through life, waiting for something to change. But standing there, in that quiet moment, something inside her shifted. There, amidst the peaceful rustling of leaves and the soft glow of the setting sun, Lily realized something that had been eluding her for months. She had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to change her life, waiting for a sign or a moment of clarity. But what if she was missing the point? What if the opportunity she was waiting for was already here, right in front of her? What if she had the power to change her life, not in some far-off future, but now, in this very moment? A deep sigh escaped her lips as she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the realization settle in. She had been so focused on everything that was wrong, on everything that felt out of her control, that she had overlooked the small possibilities around her. It wasn't just about waiting for the perfect circumstances, it was about taking action, about creating the change she wanted to see in her life. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily felt a spark of hope. The future was not something to fear, but something she could shape. It was a realization that filled her with both excitement and fear, but above all, it gave her a sense of purpose. Her thoughts drifted to her career. The job that had once felt fulfilling now seemed to be draining the life out of her. She had spent years working hard, climbing the corporate ladder, but it had come at the expense of her happiness. She had lost touch with the creative spark that had once driven her. There was a time when she had dreamed of doing something entirely different, something more aligned with her passions. Art, creativity, expression, they were all things that she had pushed aside in favor of a stable career. But standing there, in that quiet park, she realized how much she missed it. She missed the joy of creation, the thrill of pursuing something that ignited her soul. It was then that her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She reached for it absent-mindedly, still lost in her mind, and saw a message from Rachel, her best friend. *K, have you thought more about the art gallery job opening? I think it could be a perfect fit for you. *. Lily's heart skipped a beat. The art gallery job. She had seen the listing a few days ago, but had brushed it off, telling herself that it was too risky, that it wasn't the right time. But now, reading Rachel's message, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity, a chance to reconnect with something she had long buried. It was a chance to take control of her future, to embrace something that made her feel alive again. She stood there for a long moment, her finger hovering over the keyboard. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, but there was also a sense of clarity that washed over her. This wasn't just about taking a job, it was about reclaiming her own life, about trusting herself enough to take that first step into the unknown. It was a risk, yes, but it was one she was finally ready to take. With a deep breath, Lily typed a reply, *, I've been thinking about it. I'm going to apply. *. As she hit send, a wave of relief washed over her. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a step forward. A small but significant step toward taking her life into her own hands. She stood there for a moment, her heart beating a little faster, her mind racing with possibilities. What if this was the change she had been waiting for? What if this was the beginning of something new? Her thoughts then turned to Jason. She had always been afraid of confronting the truth between them, afraid of disrupting the fragile dynamic they had. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that their relationship had been stuck in a holding pattern for a while. Neither of them had been truly happy, and neither had been willing to face the discomfort that came with acknowledging it. Maybe it was time for both of them to let go, to allow themselves the space to grow and become the people they were meant to be, rather than clinging to something that was no longer working. The decision didn't come easily. She had loved Jason once, deeply, and the thought of losing him was painful. But she also knew that staying in a relationship out of fear of change wasn't fair to either of them. She needed to be honest with herself, and with him. Maybe, in time, they would both find their own paths that allowed them to grow individually. But for now, Lily needed to focus on herself. The sun had fully set by now, and the park was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Lily stood there for a few more moments, the cool air settling around her like a comforting blanket. There was still uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing: she was going to take it on her own terms. The possibilities were endless. And that was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Tomorrow was a new day, and with it came new opportunities, ones she was ready to embrace. The first rays of sunlight crept through the bedroom window, casting soft golden hues across the room. Lily sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the quiet streets below. She could hear the distant hum of the city coming to life, the cars, the people, the world moving on. But in that moment, everything felt suspended. She had always found peace in the mornings, a calm before the storm, but today, there was no peace, no calm. Her mind was clouded, heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, yet now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure if she was ready. The art gallery position, something she had dreamed of for so long, was suddenly so real, so daunting. The very idea of stepping into that world made her heart race with excitement, but also with an underlying fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she didn't belong in that world? The questions spiraled in her mind, and she felt trapped between hope and doubt, between possibility and fear. But today wasn't just about the job. It was also about everything that had happened in the past few weeks, the choices she had made, the people she had let go, the things she had come to understand about herself. Jason. The conversation they had had just days ago still echoed in her mind. It had been difficult, heartbreaking even. But as much as it had hurt, it had been necessary. The relationship had been fragile for a long time, both of them clinging to something that had long since faded. The silence that followed had been deafening. Lily closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temples as if trying to ease the ache inside her. She missed him, missed the comfort of their shared memories, but she knew in her heart that they had made the right decision. They had both been holding on to something that no longer worked, no longer fit. It had been a painful realization, but she was starting to see it for what it was, an opportunity for growth, for change, for moving on. Her thoughts shifted back to the job, to the interview that was just days away. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who kept her thoughts to herself, the one who doubted her abilities even when others didn't. The thought of putting herself in the spotlight, of speaking up and being judged, sent a shiver down her spine. But deep down, she knew this was a chance she couldn't let slip away. She had worked too hard, for too long, to back down now. She had already come so far. Lily stood up slowly, stretching her arms over her head. The light coming through the window was stronger now, brighter. It bathed the room in warmth, like a silent reminder that the world was waiting, that life was moving forward whether she was ready or not. She walked over to her desk, her eyes scanning the cluttered surface. Her portfolio was there, neatly arranged in a leather binder, a testament to the countless hours of work she had put in. She had poured so much of herself into it, into the pieces she had created, into the skills she had honed. It had taken time, months, even years, but it was hers. Her work, her passion, her dreams. Lily reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlocked it. There were messages, emails, all waiting for her attention. But one email stood out. It was from the art gallery. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened it. Asterisk, we are pleased to inform you that you have been shortlisted for an interview for the position of gallery curator. We were impressed by your portfolio and look forward to meeting you. Asterisk. The words seemed to blur together as Lily stared at them, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had made it to the next step. She had been selected. But even as the thrill of success surged through her, doubt quickly followed. Was she truly ready for this? Was she good enough? A soft buzzing sound from her phone broke her thoughts. It was a message from Rachel, her best friend, the one person who had been there through every high and low, the one person who always believed in her, even when Lily didn't believe in herself. Asterisk, you've got this. I know you do. You've worked so hard, and this is your moment. Just be yourself, and they'll see how amazing you are. Asterisk. Lily smiled, her heart warming at Rachel's words. She had heard them 1,000 times before, and each time, they lifted her up. Rachel's unwavering faith in her had always been a source of comfort, a reminder that she wasn't alone. It was strange, how something so simple could make such a big difference, but in that moment, it was exactly what she needed to hear. With a deep breath, Lily set her phone down and walked over to the window. She looked out at the world below, the city waking up. She had a choice to make now. She could give in to her fears, let the doubts consume her, or she could take this opportunity and run with it. She had faced so many challenges already, the end of her relationship, the uncertainty of her future, and yet, she had survived. She was still standing. That alone proved that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. Lily knew there was still a long road ahead. The interview was just one part of the journey, and there would be many more challenges to face. But she was ready. She wasn't going to let fear stop her anymore. The fear would always be there, lurking in the background, but it didn't have to control her. She could use it as fuel, as motivation to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Jason. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. It was brief, but the message was clear. Asterisk, I've been thinking a lot. I think we made the right decision. I hope you're doing okay. We'll both find our own way. Asterisk. Lily stared at the words for a long time, feeling the sting of their finality. It was strange how something so definitive could also feel like a new beginning. She had let go of something that had been a part of her life for so long, but it was time to move forward. The road ahead was unclear, but it was hers to walk. And she knew that, just as she had faced the end of her relationship, she could face whatever came next. She stood up, took a deep breath, and walked back to her desk. The email was still open, the interview invitation staring back at her. This was the next step, the next challenge. And she wasn't going to shy away from it. She was going to face it head on, with everything she had. Because she was ready.